If you're watching this, it's because you've started work at Paint Pots Preschool, and I haven't had a chance to come and speak to you personally to welcome you to the family. So, welcome. My mum used to say that when I was 3, when people asked me what I wanted to do for a living, that I wanted to have 100 babies. Well, be careful what you wish for, because in my case, that's sort of come true. It's always been on my heart to do something with children, and I believe that that's the reason that I exist, my purpose for being. When I was 16, I trained as an NNEB. That's quite an old-fashioned nursery qualification. Well, you'll know how old-fashioned when I tell you I had to learn how to smock a dress. It's never really come in very handy looking after children, but I could do that if I was on a desert island. I could smock you a lovely dress. After I trained, I temped mostly in London. I was already going out with David, my now husband, and he was at university in London, so I sort of followed him, and I worked in lots and lots of different nurseries all over London. When I was 19, I got married, and that was in 1980, so you could work out how old I am now if you really wanted to. And David was still working in IT. He had a proper job in those days. And we returned to Southampton so I could get married, but I couldn't find a job. At that time, this is how long ago it was, there were only two nurseries in the whole of Southampton. One at the university and one on the common, right next to the zoo. I bet you didn't even know there was a zoo on the common, but that's where it was. And neither of them would give me a job. Very sad. So I worked in an office, and I did that for 5 years. I had to pay the mortgage, so I had to get a job. I really hated it. So I know what it's like to work somewhere that I don't like. So if you find nurseries is not the place for you, don't carry on working there because it's soul destroying. Find something where your passion lies. So after 5 years, David and I were very fortunate enough to have a lovely baby called Samuel. Samuel was born in 1985, and very, very sadly, he died when he was 8 months old of a cot death. So I understand what it's like to lose a child. And in our line of work, we will always come across families that have been through something similar, and I really do understand what it's like for them. The following years were many years of fertility problems, 2 attempts at IVF, a miscarriage, and I was really hanging on by my fingertips. Fortunately, David is a really strong man, and he got us through that time. So I do understand what it's like for people going through infertility problems. Anyway, in 1988, I did conceive, and I found out that we were having triplets. Now, when you meet me in the flesh, you'll realise I'm not a very big woman, so triplets was not an easy thing for me. I went into hospital for 2 months before they were due to be born, and they were actually delivered very early at 29 weeks, so they were very tiny, just over 2.5 pounds. Very sadly, one of the triplets, William, died when he was 2 days old, and he had a condition that is operable, and in 97% of the cases, the babies are fine, but very sadly in our case, it wasn't to be, and William died. So I understand what it's like to lose a longed for baby, and some of our parents, or you yourselves, may have been through something similar. The 2 that were left, Joseph and Francesca, you will meet Joseph because he now works for Paint Pots, were in special care for 2.5 months. And for those 2.5 months, I feel as though I hardly slept, and I found breathing extremely difficult because I worried that something was going to happen to them, and one by one they would all die. There were lots of pronouncements over them about things that would be wrong with them. So I understand what it's like to give birth to a child that has different conditions that could affect them. So Joseph, for example, has cerebral palsy, but if you meet him, unless I told you, you wouldn't know. And Francesca was very stiff along one side. I was told by the doctors that they would always be behind all their peers, both physically, mentally and educationally. And I remember the doctor saying to me about Joseph in particular, that he wouldn't be in a wheelchair, but he'd never run a marathon. So imagine what I was like when Joseph was 21 and David was 50 and they ran the New York Marathon together. So you don't always have to believe everything that is said over your children, and doctors don't know it all. They've obviously got to give you the worst case scenarios too, but sometimes some children do beat the odds. And Francesca, who'd had all that physio, is now a professional dancer. So that is another thing that I can help parents with if they've had children in special care and are special children. So back to paint pots. So in 1989, when Joseph and Francesca were about 3, I always had a house full of families and children, and I'd be the one in the kitchen making Play-Doh while my friends were drinking coffee in the sitting room. And one of my friends said to me once, well, why don't you start something of your own? And I found out the rules and started a little preschool in my home. I employed 2 other ladies, and we had, I think it was 12 children in the beginning in the morning and 12 in the afternoon. And I did that for a few years. However, once I'd been going for about 4 years, I think it was, and I was offering parents their spaces for their next children. They wanted longer and longer hours, and I just didn't want to do that at home. So the time had come to look for another property and to perhaps put a bit more of a professional hat on what I did. So I chose the name Paint Pots. And lots of people say, why Paint Pots? Well, at the time we were a preschool, and I like alliteration, so Paint Pots Preschool sounds lots of purse, and I liked that. And I wanted an image that children would recognise, and most children can recognise a pot of paint. And from a pot of paint come endless possibilities, and we don't know who we're looking after. We could be looking after the next Prime Minister of England. So that was another reason for the paint pot, and also because within that pot of paint was every colour in the rainbow, and that again is our children. They come in all shapes and sizes and colours. Okay. So I wanted to start a day nursery in order to fulfil the needs of the parents. So here I was, a little lady who's only ever worked at home, who had no track record, and I went to the bank and asked to borrow £500,000, and they said yes. I don't think they would say yes now, but this was quite a long time ago, and I did manage to persuade them. We bought Waterloo Road, which was a former guest house, and within 4 weeks we'd converted it into a day nursery. I called in every favour, and everybody I knew turned up with a paintbrush and a hammer and a nail. Unfortunately, we're still paying for some of the things that we did in rather a hurry then, even all these years later. But it worked, and we were open, and on September the 1st our first children arrived, and it was brilliant. At the same time, David was still working for IBM. Oh, he was working for IBM. I said IT, but it was IBM. And we still wanted to have some more children. So Joseph and Francesca were getting ready to go to school. So we started again on the IVF route, and I had 8 more attempts, which means that I worked just to pay for those attempts at having children. So although it did work for me once, I understand the frustrations of our families who are trying and trying to have children, and it just doesn't come about. We then applied to adopt at that time, and we got approved to adopt a child. It wouldn't be a baby, but I didn't mind. And very unfortunately, I hadn't been feeling too well, and on the same week that we got approved for adoption, I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and they stopped the adoption and they wouldn't let us do it. It took me 5 years to persuade the adoption agencies that I could still be a mother. Even if I was ended up in a wheelchair, I could still be a mum, and we were very fortunate to be given Jasmine. Jasmine was 5 by the time she came to live with us, which was 5 years after we'd started. So I like to think that we were waiting for her. So rather than I wasted 5 years of my life, and it did feel like that a little, it was that I was waiting for the right child. So I understand the foster system, I understand what it is to adopt a child, And that comes with its own challenges. You know, when you look after somebody that's been in care, there are challenges, but she is a great, great joy to us. And I would recommend it to any of you that are thinking about it. At about that same time, just after we got Jasmine, we started our second nursery, which is Paint Pots 2 in Sholing. That belonged to somebody who already ran a nursery, and I bought it from her. I have learnt since and become much more canny about business, and to double check any accounts I'm given, because I was given not the correct accounts for that nursery and I paid far, far too much money for it. The longer it goes on, the less it matters. But it did matter an awful lot at that time, and I've learned that lesson. At the same time, David was being sent all around the world, and when Joseph and Cheska were about 5, he was being sent to Azerbaijan for 6 weeks, and he's a family man and did not want to go that long. And the manager we had at Paint Pots 1 left to work at the hospital. We worked out what's the least amount of money we could afford to live on, and David gave up his proper job, went back to university and retrained and did his early years degree and came to run one of the nurseries, so we did one each. At the same time, because I got really annoyed that he was now better qualified than me, I went back to university and I did an early years degree, so we're the same now, so he can't boss me about. Paint Pots 3 was in Burgess Road. That was a Montessori nursery. A lady asked us if we would like to buy it, perhaps something like November the 26th. We sort of talked about it and said we thought we would. On a handshake, she wrote to all her parents and said we were taking over on January the 1st. So we hadn't had any paperwork done, nothing at all. And we started that nursery. All the children, bar about 2, stayed with us. So that was really good. In the same year, in the June of that year, we got offered Paint Pots 4, which is in Howard Road. Howard Road Nursery had been a nursery, but it had been empty for 2 years. It had rain coming through the ceiling and it was in a terrible state. Now, the gentleman that owned that building was a property developer, and he asked us if we would like to do it. We went there to sort of say no because it was very near to Waterloo Road, but when we saw it, we got carried away with the possibilities of what we could do to it. So we said we would, but we didn't know if we could get the bank to lend us money, as they'd already lent us the money for Paint Pots 3. And he just said, well, how about if I lend you the money? Well, he'd never met us in his life, but he said he liked us, which I've been looking for another millionaire like him ever since, but it hasn't happened. We then needed about £70,000 to do it up, and he said, oh, I'll lend you that as well, which was ridiculous because he had no collateral for it or anything, and he just did it. So we were really, really pleased and happy to do it, and Paint Pots 4 was born. Paint Pots 5 is in West End. That was in a building that used to be a former church and had a school on the site. And coincidentally, David's father used to be the headmaster of that school. So we went out of curiosity, definitely to say no, that we weren't going to do it. It was quite far away from our other nurseries. It's in Hampshire, which we're not used to working with that authority, and we didn't want to do it. When we went there and looked around, we got carried away with the possibilities. So we did number 5. We went in there over the summer holidays and knocked down walls and turned it into the nursery it is today. Paint Pot 6 came next. The local authority phoned us and asked us if we would run the nursery in Woodland School. We went to have a look at it and we were probably going to say no, but it did have brilliant possibilities. Are you getting the theme here? So we thought, right, how could we do this? Because of the area it's in, it's quite difficult to get children to fill it, and it definitely doesn't have many working families. We decided that there were enough income in the other nurseries to subsidise that one, and we knew that we would make a real difference. In fact, all the ladies that work at that one say that they can tell that they are the difference to those children. So we are really pleased we do it, even though it doesn't really make much economic sense. At the same time as we opened that one, Paint Pots 4 in Howard Road was really full, and we wanted to make an extension at the back so we could have more children. It's really difficult to do a major extension when you've got children in situ. So we asked around if anybody knew a hall or a school that had some space that we could use. And St Mark's School, which is just up the road, had a room that they were going to turn into a preschool the following year. So we used it, gave them some income, trotted our children down there every morning and back again in the evening for parents to collect. At the end of our time there, St Mark's really liked us and asked us would we run their preschool for us. So that's how we started Paint Pot 7 in St Mark's School, and it's still there today. At that time, Joseph had finished his degree in marketing at Bournemouth Uni, and he knew one thing he definitely didn't want to do was work in marketing. He was thinking of going to do teacher training, as he'd spent a lot of his life around the children that we look after, and he really liked it. And we were away at a church camp, and David and I were talking about the fact that we're not getting any younger and that we would like him to come on board and work with us, which he did. So Joseph went back to university, and like David and I, did a degree in early years, and now you'll see him running around all the nurseries. Unofficially, he says his job is all the jobs mum and dad don't want to do. So I suppose it might be, and he's my secret retirement plan, although I've got no plans to retire anytime soon. Paint Pots 8. Okay, well, Paint Pots 8 was really unusual. It was a phone call that was a misdialed number, and somebody from Bannister School started talking to me when they thought they were speaking to somebody else, and asked me what I knew about after school clubs, which was precious little, but through the conversation learnt that I ran nurseries and asked me whether I might like to go to the school and run their after school club. Seemed very strange, but I did go, and the school club is running there. Paint Pots 9. Okay, so Portswood. This is the only nursery that I went out to look for. I went to look for Portswood. I wanted a nursery that would have offices and a training room, which it has. So the nursery's downstairs. Upstairs we have a large training room which fits about 60 people. So some of you may have been or may be going to do your first aid training or other training there. And our admin team, who are very necessary and important part of Paint Pots, doing all the backwork stuff, they live there. And that nursery has done really well and filled up much quicker than we thought it would, which gave me the energy to do one more. So when we were asked by the church that we attend if we would like to take on a building that they owned in the middle of town, very near Debenhams, Paint Pots 10, we did. It is a very multicultural nursery. Well, actually, it's just a preschool, that one. Very multicultural preschool, and it is slowly filling up. And so we're very pleased. So that's it. That's the 10 members of our family. So why do we do it? Are we collecting nurseries as though it was, Pokemon cards? No, it isn't. It's because we think we make a difference to our family and our children. So much so that David and I don't just involve ourselves with what happens at Paint Pots, the bit we get paid for. We work for New Life Homes. They are an organisation that supports an orphanage in Kenya. In fact, David is the chair of the trustees, and I'm a trustee, and he goes out to Africa to help there. David runs SAME, which is Southampton Men in Early Years, so to try and encourage more men to come and work with children. We both work for Southampton Community Family Trust, and we go and give talks to people that are about to become parents about what a difference it makes to your life. We both belong to another charity called Safer Families, and we offer some respite care in our home for children who might otherwise have to go into care. And 2 years ago, we started our own charity that runs out of Paint Pots House called Families First Southampton, and they support families that are struggling. And we have Nigel, who works with us and was a former social worker. Our motto is love, laughter and learning. There you are, there's my love of alliteration again. And if you've seen that, it's always in a pyramid shape. And the large part of the pyramid is the love, because we think if the children don't feel loved that we care for, they won't learn at all. And the laughter is the next thing. We want it to be fun. We want it to be fun for the children and for you and everybody that works at Paint Pots. And out of that, at the top comes the learning that the children have and the things that we learn from them. We want to aim for this, the love, laughter and learning, every single day that we're at Paint Pots. So if, like us, your purpose for living is to make a difference, welcome aboard. We want you to journey with us for a very long, long time. But if it isn't, I've heard that IKEA are recruiting, they pay quite well and you get a discount. The love of a child has to be at the centre of all we do, otherwise what's the point? You're not doing it for the huge amounts of pay or for the sexy uniform or for the glamour, but just for the privilege to do the very best job in the world. You don't know if the child you look after is looking to you to be the only person that shows him a kindness today. You may be the only one that is pleased to see them today. We want you to take very seriously what you do and know that it matters. So if I've not met you in person yet, I really look forward to doing so. Welcome to the Paint Pots family and to everything that you can bring to it.